Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to be with you today in this session. Today, I'm going to make the case for blue growth in the context of COP26 and the Food Systems Summit. Why do we need blue growth? Well, there are quite a few reasons, and I will try and itemize a few of them here. One of the big ones is that we are not managing collectively to avert negative changes due to climate change. Another one is that population growth is not abating, as previously, actually many times, has been predicted. And thirdly, because global consumption keeps on increasing. And as if this wasn't enough, global soils keep being degraded, and on a global scale, water management is not very successful. And another one that's hit us in recent years is the encroachment on natural habitats with the consequential biodiversity loss and imbalances resulting in new diseases being transferred from animals to man. And the sum of this is that the growth of the supply of nutritious food will not be enough to feed the growing global population of the future. The Glasgow COP just finished a few days ago. And one of the big questions there, or in the aftermath, one that Greta Thunberg replied to is, did it fail? And if it did fail, did all the other COPs fail as well? And that also begs the question, if they failed, were they useless? Were they maybe all useless? I would tend to agree with Greta Thunberg that this COP failed. And in the context of having an agreed collective approach to solving the problems related to climate change, you would then have to say that they have all failed. But I think I disagree with Greta about the usefulness. I think they are useful. And I think they have all been useful, because today there is a much larger number of people and a higher proportion of the global population that understands the problem that we are faced with. But how will we then move on, and what will happen? Well, we have to consider then that the problem is not an either-or problem. It has many shapes, forms, and stages, and therefore it can be reacted to in many ways. And I believe then that we will be reacting on a country-by-country basis, possibly also on a region-by-region basis, and that is important for us, a sector-by-sector basis. We will be, to some extent, mitigating the problems that are predicted, and we will definitely be adapting to the changes that have been predicted. We will suffer some consequences, but the problems and the changes will probably not be as severe, because we will react and adapt and to some extent mitigate some of them more than actually preventing them. Because we will, in spite of everything, manage to do quite a lot. We will probably be doing it more in a similar way as we have reacted to the COVID pandemic. Individual countries have been reacting, and groups of countries have been reacting, rather than the world as a whole reacting together. the outcome will, in my mind, obviously be worse than if we had all acted together, but it will not be an unmitigated disaster. And then the question for us, what can the blue aquatic sector do? Well, I think we all know that blue aquatic food is an excellent source of proteins. It is probably the highest quality protein that you can find. And fish account for about 17% of animal protein consumption by the global population. But in addition to that, the omega-3 fatty acids are increasingly being recognized as something essential to the development of man. You might know that our brains are basically made of fatty acids. So you could say that the future of mankind and its development lies in the oceans and in the seafood that we can harvest from there or produce in the marine environment. But there is greater diversity to the good qualities of fish than this. There are minerals and vitamins which are necessary to ward off all kinds of deficiency diseases. These are the micronutrients of high bioavailability, minerals and vitamins that stave off, as I said, various deficiency diseases. A few years ago, FAO set up this diagram of how food insecurity, hunger, and malnutrition affects our development. And you can see that I've circled the bright yellow arrow in the middle, where it says insufficient intake of calories, protein, vitamins, and minerals, which basically reflects the earlier slide, which would fit very nicely into this arrow and therefore contribute to avoiding child stunting and wasting, micronutrient deficiencies, and overweight and obesity. We also know that the environmental footprint of aquaculture and fisheries is much lighter than the production of high quality animal protein on land. I've circled here carps and salmonids as an example, and you can compare it to terrestrial livestock in the lower on in the slide. And basically the only terrestrial production animal that comes close to sort of the run-of-the-mill aquaculture species are chicken. So this is something that we should keep in mind. So what is then the potential of the oceans? Well, all of this production, be it on land or in the oceans, derives from sunlight. Primary production driven by sunlight. We know that 2% of the food supply in the world comes from the oceans, while 98% comes from land. Even if over 2/3 of the surface area of the globe is oceanic, and only about 1/3 is land. And you can see here on these pie diagrams that the total continental production on an annual basis is twice the production from the oceans or the marine production. However, interestingly, the world biomass or the standing stocks are a multiplicity, a couple of multiplicities greater on land than in the marine environment. And even if the production rate is higher on land, this means that the turnover in the marine environment is huge. It's fantastically huge. It means that the potential and the capacity to improvement, to increase production is great in the oceans, and we should be looking towards gaining some of that in our fight to stave off hunger and malnutrition in the world. What can we then do? Well, as I said, we're only using a fraction of the ocean space and only a fraction of the primary production today. So the question is, what can we achieve within the conventional? Can we use more of the primary production that is already being produced? Can we increase the primary production? And are there new opportunities there that we haven't seen before? We have to be responsible as well, and we need to ask ourselves, are there limits to what we can do there? And yes, there are obviously limits, and these are technical and environmental, and we need to look at that. And we don't know what these limits are, but we will not really find out until we try. This is a favorite slide of mine, which shows or compares the difference between the food pyramid on land and in the oceans. You can see that food production on land is positioned quite differently in the trophic levels than food production from the marine environment or the oceans is. We are primarily harvesting from level 1 and 2, from grains and vegetables, etc., at level 1, and through to ruminants and other animals with other types of fermenting stomachs or intestines in our food production on land. In the trophic levels above, 3rd and 4th and 5th, if there are such things as the 4th and the 5th trophic levels on land, we harvest very little or very exceptionally under exceptional circumstances and cases. We are harvesting very little from the lower trophic levels in the oceans. And our harvest there is primarily in the 3 trophic levels that we do not harvest on land. And there we are basically harvesting carnivorous animals that live on other carnivorous animals. In the context of land, these are the wolf eaters and the eaters of wolf eaters. Very picturesque animals in the imagination of the artist that designed this slide. So we need to move down the food pyramid. We need to put greater emphasis on the lower trophic levels, both for direct consumption, but the production at these lower trophic levels can also be used in aquaculture, the fastest growing food sector over the past few decades. I'm not saying that we should not be harvesting at the upper levels. I think we should still do that, but we need to get a better balance in this, because in the upper levels, there are very important vitamins, minerals, and fatty acids that we need for our development, because they accumulate in the food pyramid as we move up the trophic levels. But the inefficiency in this, in relying so heavily on the upper levels of the food pyramid, is that at each level change, we lose a lot of energy. and there's energy inefficiency. But there are also positives, and we should manage this in a different way. There are obviously opportunities. The phyto and zooplankton, we see quite a lot of research going into these elements today. Also macroalgae, and we should be looking at marine bacteria as well because of the fantastic turnover that is there. But there are also similar things happening on land in terrestrial production, which could also be of benefit. And we should remember, and I'll mention this a little bit later, that we are a part of a food system where things hang together. But there is a lot to be gained here. Aquaculture, as I said, has been the fastest growing food sector over a few decades, and it will keep on growing quite fast in the coming years, even though it might not grow equally fast as it has been growing in the past. But it has not been the marine environment that has sustained this growth, because the proportion of marine ingredients that are going into aquaculture have been reduced from 24% 20 years ago to 7% today. So you could say then that the growth in aquaculture has been one of the contributing factors to the stresses that are being put on land-based food production. And we therefore need to relieve some of that pressure and move out to the oceans, move further down the food pyramid, and harvest at the lower trophic levels in the oceans to use as ingredients in our aquaculture and for direct consumption. And to do that, we need to look at the blue aquatic food system. And here in this very picturesque and complex slide, you see the various parts of the ecosystem, from the bottom-dwelling creatures to the pelagic species, to the groundfish, aquaculture, the clams. All of this needs to be harvested. We need to do it in the right, most environmentally friendly and the most economical proportions. And if we do that, we can increase what we harvest from the oceans and use to help us feed the world with nutritious food in the future. But then I haven't mentioned the Food System Summit, except to say just earlier that we must remember that we are a part of a global food system. And the question then is, what did the Food System Summit bring to the table at the meeting in New York in September? In my mind, it was primarily recognition. In my time, I have not felt that the blue aquatic food system has gotten as much recognition as it got during this summit and in the lead up to the summit. It was not easy. People had to be reminded that this sector is there, but they responded. And during the preparation, in the prep work and in the pre-summit, good attention was being given to the blue aquatic food system. And you could hear that echo through in the UN Secretary General's concluding speech, or the summary speech at the summit, where you could feel that the marine and the freshwater aquatic food system was included in everything he was saying when talking about the food systems in general, and that SDG 14 was being held there in high regard. This we can also see in the post-summit coalition work. The Blue Aquatic Food Alliance was one of the 6 that got a mention during the summit. And we can also see opportunities in the other alliances, particularly the School Meals Alliance, plus other alliances, for the Blue Aquatic sector. And other inspired activities, the Blue Food Assessment and the Blue Food Partnership were linked and visible during the days of the summit. And I feel today that I don't need actually to show this slide, which is a slide to show how demand is growing for the Blue Aquatic products. Everybody recognizes it now. And I'd like to end with what I call the Blue Task List, which is a list that I put together just before COVID, and it still remains there. And let's keep in mind that we have opportunities, we have recognition, and we should move forward and get more from the marine food ecosystem. Thank you very much.